30 piles, place stuff everywhere.
What?
Well, I think that's what it's talking about is our 30 worlds, our 30 stories, and how the aspects of being able to have all these different doors open of different kind of containers to place whatever ideas come, rather like this is what you talked about.
Right.
Come on.
So, this is almost maybe efficiency related, or how to let things flow. Maybe like little tools and resources, tricks that people could apply. One is with 30 stories working on at once. I can't get sidetracked very easily by other ideas, because those ideas simply have other places they can land, and then I can extrapolate upon them or expand
So instead of having an idea, it's like, oh, that's a new story. Oh, but I can't do that because I'm already working on this story. Instead, it's like, well, I have a place to put that. It's in one of the other 29 stories.
Yeah.
So you just put it in there, and then it's no problem, and you don't get distracted thinking, oh, I want to do that now, but I can't.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you are doing it, so you just throw it over there.
So that was just like something I advocated for some people at some point, because of having people having difficulty staying on task or anything like that. But often that it's not always a, what do you call it? Kind of like a reaction to attachment related thing. Like if something comes up and then there's like a reaction and it's like, oh, I have a craving for chocolate bars right now, I'm going to go eat a chocolate bar, and now you're distracted and somehow you're in the kitchen eating chocolate bars when you could be working, or whatever it is. Like those are all over the place, like, you know, throughout daily life. But when it comes to actually making something happen, like and attempting to do something, it's the same. It's almost similar to like a journal or something, to get things off one's mind, but to actually make use of it is like to have a notepad with you, or have whatever things that you have that you need to do or want to do in daily life, to keep track of it, but have the things set up and ready for you to put things in the places when they come to you. Yeah. Because you have no idea when you're going to get an idea or when a solution will come to you or anything like that. You might be in the middle of something totally different. And unless that is set up, then you can't do anything with it. And so there's a lot of like upfront work that has to be done with anything. So if you have like multiple projects going on or whatever, you really have to set up a lot to get all of those things running enough that they have like as one of our friends says, a place to land. Things need a place to land.
Yeah.
And if you can make places for things to land, then anything that comes up, it can land there, and now it's almost like, you know, stored and ready for use. Otherwise, it'll pass like a journal that you never can use.
Or it'll get piled up in just one giant unorganized thing that is difficult to do anything with.
To-do lists. Big to-do lists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just an idea for organization of projects, I suppose.
Science. Systems upon systems. I wrote this down because I was describing how I don't really know a lot of science stuff in the intricacies of it. But whenever you come along and tell me some kind of science thing, I always realize that I understand the most fundamental principle of science. And you've described it before of it's always trying to catch up, or it's always in a state of catching up to what we already know, whatever. And I kind of was telling someone about it, about how Richard Feynman had a little lecture once, and he said, you know, a hypothesis or whatever, it always starts with a guess. And then a bunch of people laughed, and he's like, well, don't laugh, because it's that's how it is. And the simple version that I described was, so if you come up with math, and you get 1 plus 1, and that's 2, but a different system, and so you start and you get this point, right? And you go 1 plus 1 is 2, and like my two hands are the ones, and then you continue and you make this whole system based on that first decision that worked, that makes sense. Or if you were to scratch that whole thing and then you just considered both of my hands are actually one thing, then you might think, well, if both of my hands are one thing, then my 1 plus 1 thing doesn't work anymore. And so if you didn't have the 1 plus 1 and you just started with a different kind of basic system in place, then the whole way that it developed would turn into something else. And so it seems that people in the science and all these systems, not all sciences, kind of end up forgetting that at some point somebody came up with the original first pieces that ended up fitting into this the puzzle or the whole fabric of what knowledge is, and that they forget that there's other ways to knowledge. There's other versions of the thing that could be, but this is what is. So now we work with it, and we forget that it's actually not what reality is, but it's our knowledge upon reality.
Again, our examples are terrible. Trash examples. One that might work is like when people were, say, something as broad or famous as like a pyramids. When somebody finds the pyramids, and at the time we were thinking slaves built a lot of the old ancient structures, and that's how things worked, and whatever. Then somebody comes along, and the architects and geologists and so on, they aren't meaning to make things up for the sake of it. They're, for the most part, trying to get things right. And if they are going to say something to the general public, then it makes sense to trust them, because that's their field, that's what they study, that's their livelihood, that's everything to them in that way. So when they're like, slaves built the pyramids, it makes sense that at some point, when they said that, it would spread around and be like, okay, cool, that's the way it is. And then an entire that's like a system. And then an entire system is built around it and framed with it, and it's like a piece within that whole system. And now we have this entire understanding in this field of how ancient Egypt was and how they used pyramids and whatever, and how they built them and all this other stuff. And it's a system that gets in place. But it was based on this very a lot of tiny foundational blocks, for the most part, that were guesses, because we didn't know. But the people who had to make the guesses did their best. And even if they were short-sighted and stuff, it's taken too strongly and sternly as the thing. And then it takes so long to change, because if you were to change anything within that system, the whole system falls apart. It's not loose enough to, and the process called science isn't, if it's done it through academia and very knowledge and fact-based, empirically or whatever, then it doesn't really work, because this whole thing has to be so malleable as we figure out more dots and how these all shift, and the whole system flips over itself repeatedly. But you have to understand that it's always in a state of catching up. Other examples would be like dinosaurs or something. So you find some dinosaur bones and be like, this is what they were like. And it's like, yeah, okay, you're the one to know if anybody does. But they're taking a guess based on a bunch of other guesses. And at any point, any of these can change. And then suddenly it's like, raptors probably had feathers and probably flew above their prey and stabbed their toes into them and ate them that way. And it's like, oh, that's a very recent thing. And we didn't really think of it that way because our initial guesses didn't allow for that. And so on and so forth. And every single system is based on guesses upon guesses upon guesses. trying to catch up to things that we already understand. It's like dinosaurs were in the past. We don't know what they were like. Let's make guesses about what they were like, because we guess that they're around this time and this is how they went extinct and this is how they lived and how long and all this other stuff. We're making guesses at these things, and then we have to adjust to more information as it comes up. And it really just goes back to that, how awareness works is, this is where we are, where do we go from here?
Yeah, and just whenever you get so set in like, this is how it is and it's not going to change, well then you've lost your way because everything changes.
Mm.